But in the first instance, the oppressors will not use violence, they will use propaganda. The Daily Mail and all the whole philosophy of the capitalist system is foisted onto people so they're brainwashed into believing that their interests lie with capitalism. But if that doesn't work, they will use violence against the population if necessary.
Otherwise, but I would say... sorry, yeah, you were going to say something, sorry. Well, I'm saying it twisted his understanding of sex. Oh, it's twisted his understanding of non-violence because he made it about, for example, he said that it made him a very frustrated and it made non-violence about suffering, you know, as opposed to being about exploring beauty and exploring, like for example, womanhood, right? Gandhi began to associate womanhood with non-violence, right? Femininity. In fact, Gandhi, among his followers, one of them to consider him a mother more than a father. Even though they called him Bapu, they wanted them to consider him a mother. However, he had kind of another warped understanding of sex, because with his wife, he'd never had sex with her.
Yeah, but didn't he sleep with
that's not even getting into. That's not even getting into his.
Yeah, but did that happen?
That's not even getting into.
He was a fake, wasn't he?
He had a 19-year-old grandniece. My main point is to say that we should use in the struggle against fascism, in America or anywhere, non-violent action works best. Although it's best not to fetishize people like Gandhi, you know, make out that they're somehow the best examples of non-violent action, because they had a lot of sexual he had a lot of sexual frustration as a person, and he's not a perfect model of somebody who uses non-violence to liberate. He associated non-violence with pain and suffering and with rejection of the body, you know, rejection of the human instinct. You know, he saw it as Sorry, you want to say something?
Because with violence, it's the last resort, but that applies both to the oppressors and the oppressed. Now, if the oppressors use violence against the people have every right to use violence against the oppressors. But in the first instance, the oppressors will not use violence, they will use propaganda. The Daily Mail and all the whole philosophy of the capitalist system is foisted onto people so they're brainwashed into believing that their interests lie with capitalism. But if that doesn't work, they will use violence against the population if necessary. Then the population, the people opposing those oppressive forces, will use propaganda to oppose them. But if the opposition to them is violence, then they're forced to use violence against them.
And do you think most people have any real influence? I mean, there was a 1 million man march against Iraq, you know, and did it make any difference? Do you think ordinary people that come here as tourists have any real influence? I don't think so.
Do you want to know why that? No, do you know what? I used
Which
to
we did have, but we don't, because I was one of the people on that day, and it didn't make any difference. I mean, we went to war.
Do you want to know?
This is the world.
Do you want to know about a secret white paper that was released after that march? So for example, a lot of people feel very disillusioned with the Iraq War. We protested it, but it still went ahead, right? Are we supposed to? Is this a democracy or not? You know, we didn't want it. Most of the public didn't want it, but it still happened. However, there was a white paper, a secret white paper, by the government. Mark Curtis, British historian, fantastic British historian, released this paper, you know, analyze it. And he shows that actually the government had plans to not only invade Iraq, but to go straight on to invading Syria, Lebanon, Libya, and I believe Tunisia, another North African state, which escaped from right now. Now, they didn't do that in the end because of the public protests. So anybody who says that the protests against Iraq did nothing, they actually very much They made the British government very wary about possibly invading other countries in the future. So yeah, I agree with you. It didn't stop the invasion of Iraq, right? It wasn't a legal war. It was an act of war. It was a war, an act of aggression, right? It's not a. It wasn't a. I don't think it was justified.
The pressure of Israel.
The point of view, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today, right? To try and facilitate a conversation among the public. I have a personal agenda which I want to be upfront about. I want to put forward and help a movement which I call neo-Chartism, which tries to bring about greater democracy, tries to bring about the basic income, and certain other measures. This is something I'm very passionate about. However, I'm happy to talk about other topics as well. I'm not one of these speakers you'll find who brings everything back to Islam or brings it back to Christianity. My qualifications, well, To start a social movement, you don't need any qualifications.
What gives you the right? I mean, what insight do you have?
Okay. Well, I'm in my second year at university. I'm doing my BA in history and anthropology. I have a personal experience with, social movements. My mother and my father were part of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. They gave me a lot of that, kind of wisdom that they learned from that. Now I just want to see a society with more justice and more equality. You don't have to have any formal qualifications to start a movement. For example, Cesar Chavez, with the grape workers, he was just a farmer. He didn't have a degree, a university degree, and he started a whole social movement to bring about more pay for Mexican American farmers in California. Another example would be Martin Luther King had a doctorate. He was a theologian, right? But most of the people that organized the Black Civil Rights Movement in America, most of them didn't have degrees. Most of them, you'll never hear their names. We like to put the big names in history textbooks, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, but actually, they were riding a wave of thousands of organizers at the grassroots level, that were doing most of the activism that really made a difference, organizing the sit-ins at the lunch counters and so on. So yeah, that's my qualifications: compassion. I'm interested in history, trying to change society. Anybody who has this can join a social movement, or start a social movement. So neo-Chartism. Do you want to go into detail about neo-Chartism?
You're advocating non-violence.
Oh, I'm advocating non-violent action in any social struggle.
Okay, so this is the situation you're talking about.
Well, I started the discussion with the conflicts in Charlottesville, right? But no, I tried to make that general to say, in any situation, it works better than violence, especially in the last century. I don't know if most people would agree with it. Do you think that most people would agree with that?
Most people are decent, yeah. I think what your point was today about non-violence. My point was that there was a million-man march 15 years ago, and it didn't make much difference. And this man made, I think, an interesting point as well about oppression. And I just wondered what your point was, because you're talking, and you seem very sensible, but I didn't quite know what you were talking about.
My point here, in this particular session, non-violent action works better than violence.
We don't have the power. You really need to talk to people in power, because you're talking about police corruption. You're talking about police violence. We're all decent people are against that. But the power lies with authorities. It doesn't lie with ordinary people. It doesn't lie with people, because if it lied with people, you wouldn't have these abuses. Power corrupts, doesn't it? And if it's with the police or with any kind of political agency, there's corruption. Ordinary people don't really have the power. I think a lot of people, decent ordinary people don't have the power.
What actually said about power? He said that power tends to corrupt. He didn't say power corrupts, he said power tends to corrupt. And absolute power corrupts, absolutely, right? That's the famous quote. People misquote that all the time. And now, it's not to say that, power is dispersed equally. Obviously, the people more power or less. But ultimately, the power lies with the people, right? The power lies with the people. It's where, we've had this observation made centuries ago with Hume, the philosopher David Hume, recognized that ultimately, if the people allow it, it'll happen. So power rests on consent of the governed. Even in the most ruthless dictatorship, even in North Korea. North Korea. No, hold on. Let me finish. Take North Korea. Dictatorships, and in general, are actually very fragile. They're much more fragile than they appear to be. They rest on very shaky pillars of support. Not only the propaganda system, but the police force. If the police force revolts, as they did in Manila against the Marcos regime, then that's the end of the regime. The police, you have to have the police and the army on your side if you're the dictator. Otherwise, you can't run a regime, right? So that's already one pillar of support, which is at the bottom. We like to think of power as coming magnetically from charismatic individuals, as if it's some kind of force field that rests around David Cameron or around Stalin or around Bill Gates or any of these people. We like to think power, but it's actually not like that. Power, they get their power from the consent of the government.
Well, the point. This thing about you're wrong.
It's great. I mean, I'm a vegetarian. I wouldn't stand on an ant, But the thing is, sometimes, peaceful protest doesn't work.
Sorry, so, no, it's wrong. Can I say?
Basic fallacy in Speaker's Corner is to say either it has to be this or that.
Sorry, this man.
Sorry,
Let's
you go.
just get some facts. The Iraq War, 2/3 of the British people, at the time of that demonstration, 2/3 of the British people supported the Iraq War. Because the newspapers and all the media were saying propaganda, war. Most people,
The BBC and the liberal media as well.
most people
Banging
supported
the
the
drum for
Iraq War, even though it was obvious to anyone with any thoughts whatsoever it was completely wrong. Blair followed the Americans, as every British Prime Minister would do, and he went to war. The demonstration, impressive as was, and I was on it, was at least 1 million, perhaps even 2 million strong.
2 million.
But everyone in the whole country that was against the war was probably there in London. But don't forget, there were 60 million people in the country. 2/3 of the population supported the Iraq War. Now, of course, with all this which comes out, everyone's against the Iraq War. Isn't it terrible? Isn't it terrible? But at the time, and the important time, was that we stopped believing the propaganda from the hierarchy and the ruling class,
Ladies and
because
gentlemen,
they are the
it's not
people
just
that
the Daily
control
Mail.
your mind.
It's not just the Daily Mail, it's not just the right-wing press. I agree with what you're saying, honestly. But it's not just the right-wing press as well. It's the left-wing press as well. It's the so-called liberal media, The Guardian,
That's not left-wing.
the Independent, the BBC. And in many ways, that's actually more dangerous because those newspapers and those news outlets, they like to think of themselves as, you know, honest and upstanding and unbiased and objective and so on. But actually they still have power just as well as anybody else. Sorry, go on.
Someone has told me that you are.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Someone has told me that you are talking about no violence.
I'll rephrase what she's saying so everybody can hear.
Someone has told me that he's talking about no violence. So I want to ask him, do you think that there would be no more violence or less violence if all the person would be vegetarian?
Okay, so this lady's saying, do you think there'd be more non-violence if everybody was vegetarian? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
Hitler was a vegetarian.
I'm going to put it on YouTube.
Yes, but less violence.
Okay. I'm personally, I'm a flexitarian, so I'm, you know, if I don't eat meat at home, but if I go out and I'm with friends, and if I go to their house, and they, you know, I was in Paris visiting my girlfriend, and her father's French, and you know, they had a roast chicken, and I didn't want to be rude, so I in France, it's not a, there's no little, if you go to restaurants, there's no menu that says, there's no little V next to the vegetarian dishes. In fact, there aren't any vegetarian dishes, really.
So are you vegetarian?
I'm flexitarian.
Are
I'm
you
flexible.
flexitarian?
I want to, yeah.
So what does it mean?
So it means that I eat mainly a vegetarian diet. That's basically what
If it's starving,
mainly a vegetarian diet.
Except when it comes to sex.
I'm very slim because I don't eat. I haven't eaten today.
You don't eat?
And I smoke.
Okay. So I have some fruit in my backpack.
Oh, I'd love some, thank you. Can I have some now? Everybody has to bring offerings.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
come on.
what do you prefer?
I'm gonna do a whip round for cigarettes and spare change.
Oh,
I'm joking, I'm
come
joking. Do you know, ladies and
Come
gentlemen, that's
on.
how Speaker's Corner used to be. You know, it was a profession coming here speaking. You'd have people, the people that'll come up to you after a speech and ask you questions, I think they were called come-ons, or punters. That's what the speakers used to call them. You had people like...
You shouldn't smoke anymore. You look so pale.
Stop being a mother. Stop being
Okay,
a mother.
I'm okay for now. I don't want to. If there are any children in the audience, I don't want to send a bad message.
I'm concerned about your health.
You know, it's funny. My head teacher used to say this to me all the time.
Yeah. Both. Not mental, only
Standing here,
physical.
yeah.
I'm polite, you know.
The problem with this generation of people, including myself, is that they spend a lot of time indoors. In fact, I'm actually at the point now where I'm allergic to the sun. If I come out on some days when it's sunny and I look up at the sun, I actually sneeze. Seriously, I've had this. I think I might be allergic. Now,
So your girlfriend should take you out more often.
oh, she's great. She goes to the Alps and she walks around in the
So
wild.
why don't you go with her?
I can't. It was
then you
a
go up
family
there and stand
holiday.
up and talk to
I can't. I don't know them that well. I can't invite myself to.
So what's that book about?
Oh, this is where I got my discussion about Gandhi from. Yeah, this is a fantastic author called Brian Morris, who actually lectures at my university, Goldsmiths University of London. Yeah. And Brian Morris is an anthropologist who she studies animals. He's very interested in vegetarianism. And one of the chapters in his book explores this false dichotomy, this false dualism between two schools of thought. So it's represented by a Japanese peasant he once saw, carrying a banner which said, which is the right way? Is it Hitler, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, or is it Buddha and Jesus Christ? Which way do we go? You know, is it the vegetarian, peace-loving mystic, or is it the carnivorous, warmongering warlord? And I think it's a false duality, because you've got numerous instances throughout history of groups, organizations that they don't reject the physical world as we know it. They embrace it. They love it. They teach mutual aid, tit for tat. And these are I'm referring here to the anarchist movement, especially the libertarian socialist movement, anarchism. Talking about left-wing Marxists like Rosa Luxemburg and Anton Pannekow, right? These are people, you know, I myself am neither a Marxist or an anarchist, but I recognize that's a very good, healthy tradition. Somewhere in the middle, between being a warmonger and
Carl, can I say about Gandhi? Gandhi, I'm not underestimating Gandhi's influence in the movement that he headed, but it wasn't the reason why India had its independence. The real reason was that Britain lost the Second World War because it lost its empire. The Americans were ready to take in, but the British lost their empire and they could see the writing on the wall. And in India there was violent demonstrations against the British. And the British realised after losing in the Far East, in Singapore and the Far East, that they were unable militarily to hold on to India. So they had to make the best of a bad situation. So they gave India independence, and they also partitioned India very cunningly by dividing and ruling India, by keeping in with the Indians and then
what Churchill called that? Churchill said we need to keep a bit of India. That's a quote from Churchill. He said that, and that's what he's referring to Pakistan. They needed a strategic base in South Asia to complement their bases around the world. And do you know what? The lengths that they went to cultivate that very useful patch of South Asia, the lengths they did involved allying themselves to some quite unsavory radical Islamic organizations, like the Muslim League. They promoted them above the rest of the population of Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to offer you another truth today. I've offered this gentleman the truth that non-violent action works better than violence, and I'll offer you another truth that British governments since World War II have had a history of colluding with radical Islam. This is something that the media, you won't find in the mainstream press. The British government has colluded with organizations like Muslim Brotherhood, like the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, even the nascent Al-Qaeda before it became called Al-Qaeda. In the 1980s, you had Mujahideen on the ground, used as a proxy force to fight the Russians in Afghanistan, given databases by the CIA in liaison with MI6, our intelligence service. Now these databases later lent their name to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda in Arabic means the base, referring to those databases. And those databases carried the names of possible insurgents that could be signed up to the organization. So the West has a share of the responsibility in the rise of radical Islamic groups like Al-Qaeda. Not only that, we're now relying more than ever on groups like states like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which are known sponsors of terrorism.
So in terms of supporting Islamic militants during the kind of Soviet-era Cold War, what should we have done? What's the alternative?
Well, for one thing, we need to recognize that that was an act of provocation to the Soviet Union, which likely contributed to its greater militarization and so on. That actually suited America. Having a highly militarized Russia justified having its huge military.
Why do you leave what ISIS do? Why don't they support ISIS? They support ISIS do.
Sorry?
British government support ISIS do. Why doesn't they support ISIS do?
We should stop ISIS.
No, the British government support ISIS.
The British government is stopping ISIS.
No, they support
ISIS. No, I don't believe that.
I don't know. That's you don't know. That's what they do. They're in America.
No, I believe if you said Turkey and Saudi Arabia, which are British allies, if you said those two states were supporting ISIS, or had only just recently stopped supporting ISIS, then yeah, I'd be like, okay, so we are complicit in that. But I've seen no evidence whatsoever to say that the British government has directly given arms, weapons, training, funds to ISIS. However, we did give arms and funding to the FSA, the Free Syrian Army. Now, the Free Syrian Army was responsible for a lot of looting and pillaging in Syria, in these cities, right? So much so that a lot of the Syrian members of the public were happy to actually have ISIS come in and restore some semblance of order, right? This is a phenomenon that's not really spoken about that much in the mainstream. You have journalists like Patrick Coburn writing about this. It's a fantastic book which I recommend to everybody, The Rise of ISIS. in which he goes into the background of how this organization became so powerful. Basically, ISIS is a monster created in the scorched earth left by the Iraq War.
ISIS then?
You don't have to be a radical like me to believe that. Stella Remington, the head of MI5, Eliza Manning and Butler, these are heads of intelligence services. They both believe, no matter the benefits of getting rid of Saddam Hussein,
How would you
the
deal with
destruction of
ISIS
Iraq, it was fertile ground for ISIS to come about. Sorry, I think this gentleman wanted to say something.
With non-violent movements, how would you deal with, for example?
Oh no, there's non-violent action doesn't work all the time. I never said it worked all the
You accept
time.
that?
No, I said it
there
works
are
better than
exceptions,
violence.
yeah?
I never said it works all the
Oh,
time.
it's not-
So for example, facing ISIS, you have to use a range of
Most
tactics.
people would accept
You have
that,
to use a
wouldn't
range
they?
of
You're not
tactics,
telling us
violent
that-
and
You're not really
non-violent.
telling us anything that we don't know already. Non-violence doesn't work all the time. We know that. In defence, you need to. I mean, I
must say so. You have to be careful when you come to Speaker's Corner projecting your own knowledge onto other people. Like for example, I had somebody come to me and say to me, I was speaking about the difference between what politicians say they do and what they actually do. You know, like what's called official policy and operative policy, right? And he was saying this to me, he was like, oh, but everybody knows about this. And you know, this woman in the audience said, I actually didn't really know there was a term for that. You know, not everybody's acquainted with the writing of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Gene Sharp, Erica Chenoweth, these authors. Not all of them are acquainted with these writers about non-violence. So you must be careful to. Sorry to sound moralizing, but I just be careful to, like, in any situation. I do this all the time. I assume that people have certain knowledge about certain, questions, are in my mind. I assume that they know about it and they're ready to have a discussion. A lot of people aren't. We live in a very heavily propagandized society, which is not necessarily open to discussions such as was it justified dropping the bomb on Hiroshima? That kind of discussion. A lot of people aren't ready to discuss that. A lot of people assume, oh yeah, it was the Americans who they wanted to win the war sooner for everybody. When actually that was very far from their minds. As the historian Gar Albovitz shows, the dropping the bomb on Japan was really America's way of sending a message to Stalin, who was looking to expand his territory into East Asia. That I think is a more realistic view of why they dropped the bomb. So now if you assume that everybody knows that, you're going to run into problems because a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people assume that America dropped the bomb on Japan to try and end the war. It was full of them.
You're saying that ISIS came out of school.
So I can't hear. Can you
I think it's true. Whether or not we should have gone to Iraq in the first place, I think the general feeling is that we should. Should we have stayed in? Some commentators said the surge was working. Attacks against US forces were down by 90% or something. Law and order was slowly returning. So, should we have stayed in?
Well, this is assuming that it was a legal occupation to begin with. It was an act of aggression. It was illegal according to the Nuremberg definition of war.
Even if they could have
it was a crime against humanity. In fact, Tony Blair is complicit in a crime against humanity with the Iraq War. Okay, I'm going to say this to the camera. I say this to everybody here. He needs to be tried. Tony Blair needs to be tried for war crimes. He lives very close there, actually, and he's got lots of armed guards surrounding him for good reason. I see why.
So would you say even if there was a kind of irrefutable case that staying in would have been better for everyone?
I'm just saying rewind the picture a bit. I know what you're saying. It did increase some law and order. Maybe it did. I don't think it did personally. I think it increased sectarian strife. The CIA and MI6 have evidence now of what's called the Iraq effect. The sevenfold increase in terrorism since the Iraq War, since the invasion of Iraq. There is evidence now that it's causing more harm than good. Now you've got blowback in the form of the Paris attacks. I don't know if I don't know much about the attacks in Barcelona that recently happened. I don't know if they're linked to ISIS. I have no idea. But that could be a case of blowback as well.
So yeah, I'm not saying Iraq we should have gone just 5%, but I'm just saying, so your position, it sounds like it's a surge. What didn't work? It didn't reduce, it didn't bring greater stability to Iraq. We were losing that war, it was right to withdraw. Is that your position?
Shouldn't have gone in the first place.
You shouldn't have gone in the
Sorry,
first place.
I'm trying to sidestep that question and say we were there. Right, should we have stayed, finished the job, or were we right to draw out?
The job is the job.
Should we?
That's not what
Fine.
The interesting
Should we
thing
have
was that
stayed in, tried to force law and order until there was enough stability that we can leave that country?
I think democracy, like socialism, is something that has to come from the grassroots. It can't come from a party or an occupying regime. My feeling is that with values like democracy and socialism, they come from the grassroots. If they're genuine, if they're being used for propagandist reasons, we've got the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea. If they're being used for, then it's easy to see through.
But whether Iraq is becoming a true democracy, some commentators said it was getting better. Not fully democratic, it was becoming more so.
Could you point me to any of those commentators? I'd be interested to...
There was an interesting video recently, and I don't know much about this topic, I'm just going to provoke questions. There was a good video recently, it's by Creighton University, who as many may know is a right-wing source. They actually quoted a number of left-wing, democratic figures in that, who were saying, Joe Biden was one, for example, he was saying, I see great hope for Iraq's future. The impression is things are stabilising. That's George Bush's surge. It was either 2007, 2008, I'm not sure. It was working. But then suddenly, arguably, this video's arguing for political reasons, suddenly we pulled our plug, as was the popular view that we should do, and that led to basically
I think the collapse of the Iraqi state infrastructure definitely came about because of the bombings. Not just the really horrific war crimes committed in Fallujah, where you had reports from refugees that the American snipers were shooting down children. I'm not just talking about those, particular events. Just in general, it was about destroying the state infrastructure. Really, that's what happened. It was in oil fields, it was in hospitals, schools, mosques, and this is an English tradition. MI6 was complicit in one of the worst terrorist attacks in the 1980s. It's an attack in Lebanon, trying to kill Sheikh Falala, who's a radical Islamist. They set a bomb outside his mosque, timed for when the prayers, the Muslims would leave the mosque. Killed about 80 people, and he actually managed to escape. So, but to answer your question, I don't think so. I mean, I think it was good that we got out straight away. So we did. I'm interested in reading this more about this particular view.
I know really, it's just a fascinating short video. It claims that
the question I'm interested in is again rewinding. Before the war even happened, we know for a fact that most of the 9/11 bombers were Saudi Arabia, right? They're from Saudi Arabia. Now, why? I'm not saying we should have, but I'm interested as to why we never bombed Riyadh. Why was that never chosen as a target? Why was Baghdad just automatically assumed?
Because it was a threat to Israel. Destabilised the Middle East. We don't have a threat against Israel anymore because it's destabilised.
Interesting. I never heard Israel analysis in that analysis. The two most common reasons I've heard for the Iraq War.
Oil.
Well, yeah, oil was one, but also projecting influence in the region. Just basically set an example. Like, don't you talking about all those other Muslim states? Don't ever try what Iraq just tried. Basically, don't try and pursue a course separate from Western foreign policy. Be like a good Muslim state, like Saudi Arabia. That's the message. Sorry.
The violence in Iraq happened because of the Americans, most of the violence, because of the Americans, not despite the Americans. The reason is when the Americans first came in, there were a lot of attacks against the American troops, but most of those attacks were unsuccessful militarily. Why? Because the Americans had armored vehicles, the soldiers had bulletproof vests. It was extremely difficult to kill Americans. So what happened, the guy who was head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, his name was Zakawi. The guy he's changed his strategy. The strategy was, rather than attacking the Americans, make Iraq ungovernable for the Americans. When you make this was the thing. When you make Iraq ungovernable, the Americans will eventually have to leave. So when they leave, then you can declare victory. That was the changes tactics from attacking American soldiers to creating mayhem. And the easiest way to create mayhem was the Sunni Sheikh. So for example, there was a mosque in Samaria. There was a Sheikh mosque in Samaria, which was blown up. That made the Sheikh very angry. So the Sheikh started attacking the Sunnis. It was done deliberately to make Iraq ungovernable. So to answer the question is, the violence, most of the violence was because of the Americans.
That was my question. That was never my question.
No. I want to hear it again. Sorry.
Nothing to do with whether we should have gone. I don't know enough about that topic. The general view is we shouldn't have gone fight. For the sake of argument, let's just concede that. Once we were there, some sources I have seen, I don't know if they're right, have claimed that despite the chaos, even if we caused that chaos, we were fixing that chaos with the surge, we were getting better, and then suddenly
the propaganda said this. The BBC very uncritically just repeated the line that America was there to promote democracy and human rights and peace and so on. They never said things like the White House sources claim that this is why they're there. They just said that's why America and Britain is there. They just took it at face value.
Well, I guess he's involved in it.
So your question is a loaded question because it rests on the assumption that that's why we were there, to promote democracy in the first place, which we weren't.
It's not. I'm not saying I'm both purely talking on the was the surge decreasing violence, decreasing decreasing violence,
My understanding is that Iraq had a million deaths by some by the more extreme
The violence was because the Americans were there.
and I'm
So
just
if
not
they left,
addressing
I'm saying if they left, there'd be less violence.
Okay, the video I suggested exactly opposite was true. That's fine. That's the argument. The bigger question is you're talking about the nasty allies we made British American government and Jews not accepted. Absolutely. But at the time, was it worth it? The Soviet Union, we started to address that. But because we fought against them, we were starting to address that by saying, actually, we voted them. That's part of it. Was the Soviet Union bad enough to own people, their rights, their liberty standards, justify a war against them? Sorry, I'm jumping back to supporting.
No, we're talking about supporting, supporting the Mujahideen in Iraq, in Afghanistan in the 1980s.
Afghanistan was the start of it all. Afghanistan had a government which was a social democratic government, which was ostensibly communist, in reality was a social democratic government. The right-wing Islamic fundamentalists were against that government because it wasn't a religious government, and they started to retreat. That was supported by the Americans quite openly, and the Americans quite openly said, we want to make Afghanistan a Vietnam for Russia. That's what we want to do, and that's what they tried to do. Eventually the Russians left and the Americans went in. And the Americans went in to support anti-Soviet regime, Soviet regime in Afghanistan, which they were against because of the parts of the But the reality was that the Americans supported these extreme violent jihadists. It didn't. Everything from that moment on, including the bombing in Spain just the other day, was directly because of the American influence.
So basically what it was that the Americans were happy to pursue short-term interests, and the British as well. The British are always overlooked in these analyses. They're happy to pursue short-term political gains, foreign policy gains, at the expense of the long-term safety. As this gentleman once pointed out in Speaker's Corner, it's about creating a Frankenstein's monster. They may have achieved a certain specific aim in the short term, but had very negative long term.
Could one say that defeating the Soviet Union
justified? Is that the question?
Yes, basically.
No, it's not justified. Because
the Soviet Union wasn't bad. I don't have an answer. The Soviet Union wasn't bad enough to use these logic.
Well, okay. The thing with history, right? I mean, I study history at uni, and one of the constant questions that comes is it okay to judge the past? Is it okay to find out, was this person justified in doing this, and so on? You know, when we look at people like Columbus, who did a horrible act of torture and so on, was he justified in doing that? And I think it's a nice discussion because it's like, well, no. We have to relate it. We have to relate it to the situation now, right? Whatever you think of Clinton or Tony Blair, right? These people are part of history now. Whatever you think of these people, the question, it's not you can't just judge them for the sake of judging it. It's pointless. You've got to relate it back to where we are now. So my message is now that we need to be aware of this, that we have a part to play in the creation of radical Islam. We can't create the separation of them over there, these sort of radical Islamists, we're in Western civilization. Well, Western civilization
actually crusade to defy the Roman authority. Now the first, if he asks you to vote, give him your tunic. Now what would have happened then is the guy's now naked. Right? Now that was actually a bad thing. Their society said that if you were with somebody who was naked, it would have been a problem rather than a shame on you. So in those three cases, Jesus is defying the Roman authority. Now I'll take another example. So the Pharisees tried to play a trick on Jesus, and they said, so they got somebody to say, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus said, show me a coin. So they showed him a coin and he says, whose picture? They said Caesar, and Jesus says, now that's often interpreted as being telling him to pay taxes. However, look at it a little bit closer. Now he asked for a coin. The Pharisees were not, there was a particular coin which depicted Caesar as a god.
Yeah. I made a video about it. It's going to be up. It's going to be up now. Talk on title.
The actual, it was
cool, man. Well, I'm assuming it's going to be there. And I'm assuming it's in there.
So he said,
take it down rather than him going over your head. He's asked me to take it down. So the reasons he gave me taking it down is no one's discussing anything that he's never put out himself. He's put in the public domain. It's not private anymore. Once you yourself in the public, it's no longer private. Exactly. Just he didn't like what I realised is that whenever anyone says anything A perceived as negative, murder, and everyone says anything positive about his lifestyle, and he doesn't mind people discussing his private life. So he's not consistent with that's what it is. Yeah, get taken down. I'm going to try and find somewhere else I can pull it up or I link to. Yeah, all my videos now, when I put them out, they're monetized. Right now they're just like half monetized. They're not available for all adverts. Before they get really monetized, they have to manually review the page. It's like it's what it is. It's what it is. That goes. That's how people are.
When you started this speakers?
Well, on YouTube it's just speakers corner stuff. Well, I've got a little bit before that, like some pro-black events, like reparations march, stuff like that.
You do this professionally, yeah?
Well, it's my own thing, like professionally in the sense of I do it well.
You set this up and
Respect
for that. Voices need to be heard. The more voices, diversity, the better it is. You get a better picture. You know, why follow one way of thinking?